Subscribe to the channel so you don't miss the next videos. The story begins in the late 1930s, long before the first American bombers crossed the English Channel. At that time, oil was the most valuable resource in the world. Whoever controlled refining, aviation fuel, and synthetic lubricants controlled modern war. And in that narrow intersection between business and politics stood the largest oil company on earth, Standard Oil of New Jersey, and Germany's chemical and industrial giant, IG Farben Industrie AG. From 1929 to 1939, Standard Oil and IG Farben were not rivals. They were partners. Together they shared patents for synthetic fuel, tetraethyl lead, an additive that made high-octane aviation fuel possible, and hydrogenation, the process that allowed coal to be turned into liquid fuel, the backbone of Nazi Germany's synthetic fuel program. Documents later seized by the U.S. Army in 1945, IG Farben Archives, file code AG Luna 221/3, confirmed that Standard Oil transferred technical data and production licenses to IG Farben through the joint venture Ethyl GmbH, headquartered in Frankfurt, between 1934 and 1938. This collaboration was legal at the time. The United States and Germany were not at war. But those technologies would later allow the Luftwaffe and Panzer divisions to operate deep into the Soviet Union. In 1938, IG Farben's director, Hermann Schmitz, visited the United States to discuss ongoing chemical exchanges with Standard Oil representatives in New York. According to a memo preserved in the U.S. Department of Justice Archives, Antitrust Division, Case File Standard IG Farben Agreement, 1941, Schmitz met with Frank Howard, a senior Standard Oil executive. The memo reads, "Discussions concerned continued cooperation on production patents for aviation fuels, with particular attention to tetraethyl lead refining techniques." At that same moment, the world was sliding toward war. In Europe, Hitler's armies had already taken Austria and Czechoslovakia. In the United States, isolationism was still policy. American corporations could still trade with Germany through neutral intermediaries. When Germany invaded Poland on September 1, 1939, and the war officially began, those industrial links didn't vanish overnight. They were rerouted through neutral countries like Spain, Switzerland, Portugal, and Argentina. Between late 1939 and December 1941, U.S.-controlled refineries in Aruba, Curaçao, and Venezuela exported millions of barrels of oil products to European neutral customers. According to British Naval Intelligence, Report ADM 223581, declassified 1978, portions of these shipments were re-exported to the Reich. The report stated, "Commercial cargoes of lubricants and aviation components of American origin continue to arrive in Spain and are transferred overland through Franco's territory into occupied France." Even as the U.S. moved closer to war, private trade continued. In 1940, the U.S. government approved the export of ethyl lead to Spain and Vichy France. The reasoning was simple: Spain was neutral, France was technically independent. But IG Farben had agents in both territories. They received those materials through local companies, CAMSA, Spain, and Société Coleman, Vichy France, both listed as civilian consumers. By late 1940, American intelligence had started to notice. The U.S. Embassy in London transmitted a cable to Washington, file State Department Telegram 841.50/1169, dated December 27, 1940. Persistent reports indicate that fuel additives of American origin are being rerouted to German-controlled Europe via Iberian intermediaries. Despite the warnings, the legal framework for these transactions remained untouched. Until the United States entered the war on December 11, 1941, American companies could not be prosecuted for trade with nations technically neutral. That loophole allowed certain firms to keep indirect commerce alive. The most important was the Standard Oil or IG Farben cartel agreement, dating back to 1929. In a 1942 Senate testimony, later published as U.S. v. Standard Oil Company New Jersey et al., antitrust lawyer Thurman Arnold said, "Through the ethyl and Jasco patents, Standard effectively restricted production of vital fuel additives in the U.S. and licensed those patents to IG Farben, which became the sole supplier for Germany's aviation industry. While that may not have meant direct shipments of fuel, it did mean American origin technology was still sustaining the German war machine." Then came 1942, the year American bombers began to fly over Europe. The 8th Air Force set up in England. Daylight raids began. Their main targets were refineries and synthetic fuel plants, the same facilities built on shared pre-war patents between Standard and IG Farben. In August 1942, The first bombing raid on the Luna Works, IG Farben's synthetic fuel plant near Merseburg, took place. It was a failure. The plant continued operating almost undisturbed for another 2 years. Declassified U.S. Army Air Force reports, 8th Air Force, Mission File 94-26, 1942, indicate that production capacity was restored within weeks. At the same time, American investigators from the OSS, Office of Strategic Services, were tracing financial channels connecting German industry to South American intermediaries. In an internal OSS report, Code X2223, 1943, the conclusion read, German firms retained commercial influence over subsidiaries operating in Argentina and Chile, originally capitalized by U.S. concerns. These act as purchasing agents for fuel and chemical materials entering Europe through Spain and Portugal. The United States was bombing Germany from the air, and at the same time, through layers of neutral countries and shell corporations, German industrialists were still receiving oil and chemicals that traced back to American refineries. The hypocrisy was not strategic, it was systemic. Global trade had created a machine too large to stop. Even the Allied Combined Intelligence Committee noted the contradiction in an April 1943 bulletin, file CIC/42-73. Corporate patent restrictions and pre-war agreements continued to hinder domestic production while indirectly assisting Axis powers through neutral commercial flows. That same year, the American Embassy in Madrid reported that fuel deliveries labeled as industrial lubricants for agriculture were in fact redirected to German-controlled plants in southern France. The report, dated May 14, 1943, said, consignments originating in Caribbean refineries and documented as U.S. commercial exports to Spain are being processed by CAMSA and partially transferred to German buyers through occupied territory. When the OSS followed the trail, they found tankers flying Panamanian flags, legally neutral, carrying American-produced oil. Those tankers unloaded at Cadiz and Bilbao. From there, rail transport moved part of the cargo north to the French border. German invoices marked Maskinenol, Zivilverwendung, machine oil, civilian use, disguised their true purpose. By 1943, the Allies knew what was happening. But the shipments couldn't be stopped completely without alienating Spain and Portugal, whose cooperation was vital for intelligence and logistics in Europe. In late 1943, a secret memorandum by the British Ministry of Economic Warfare, file MEW/BL14/3, Spanish petroleum deliveries, summarized. Despite official embargoes, petroleum shipments originating in the Western Hemisphere continue to reach German industry through Iberian intermediaries. The quantities are small but strategically significant. That phrase, strategically significant, appears again in U.S. Senate hearings 4 years later. By the time American bombers obliterated Luna, Ludwigshafen, and Politz in 1944, those refineries had already stored enough raw materials to continue production. Some of that stockpile came from pre-war American-linked oil transactions. So when soldiers entered IG Farben's destroyed headquarters in Frankfurt in May 1945, they found among the ruins, perfectly preserved files marked Standard Agreement 1938. By the beginning of 1944, the contradiction inside the Allied alliance had become impossible to ignore. While U.S. bombers of the 8th Air Force were flying daily over Merseburg, Ludwigshafen, and Politz to destroy Germany's synthetic fuel facilities, reports from the Office of Strategic Services (OSS) and the Ministry of Economic Warfare (MEW) in London showed that components of that same industrial network still relied on oil products that had traveled halfway across the world from refineries under American control. The OSS report, Industrial Exchange Through Neutrals, File X2 of 288, dated January 1944, began with a blunt assessment. Despite Allied embargoes, German-controlled companies continue to acquire lubricants and refining chemicals through neutral intermediaries, primarily in Spain, Portugal, Argentina, and Switzerland. The material's origin is often obscured by complex corporate ownership tracing back to U.S. or British affiliates. The mechanism was simple, almost legal. Standard Oil of New Jersey owned controlling shares in refineries in Aruba, Curaçao, and Venezuela. The crude extracted there was shipped to neutral customers under Panamanian or Argentinian registry. These buyers resold portions of those cargoes to Iberian distributors. From there, by rail or truck convoys, part of the material crossed into occupied France, then to Germany. British naval intelligence had tracked the vessels, but the paperwork, the bills of lading, the port customs forms, all appeared clean. In a memorandum to the U.S. State Department, dated February 17, 1944, British Liaison Officer Commander E.W. Denning wrote, "Oil cargoes of Caribbean origin, nominally consigned to Spain for agricultural and industrial consumption, are being diverted through the Pyrenees into Reich-controlled territory. Investigation indicates the origin of certain refined products at standard-controlled facilities in the Antilles." In Washington, the response was silence. Officially, the companies operated under neutral commercial law until December 1941, and any subsequent transfers through third parties were beyond their control. The war bureaucracy had larger priorities, defeating the Wehrmacht in Normandy, destroying Japan's fleet, and oil flows through Spain seemed a secondary problem. But in London, the economic warfare executive was less patient. In May 1944, they compiled the Petroleum Deliveries Iberia Report No. 47, concluding, "The persistence of North and South American petroleum deliveries to Spain, and thence into France, remains a critical loophole. German industry continues to derive measurable advantage from these supplies. The quantities weren't enormous, measured in tens of thousands of barrels, not millions, but they contained the special additives, lubricants and refining agents Germany could not easily replace under blockade." Meanwhile, inside the wrecked cities of Germany, Allied intelligence teams were preparing for what came next: the seizure of enemy industry. The Combined Intelligence Objectives Subcommittee (COS) compiled lists of targets, among them IG Farben's Frankfurt headquarters, the Luna synthetic fuel complex, and the chemical laboratories at Auschwitz-Monowitz. When American troops entered Frankfurt in late March 1945, they found IG Farben's central archives intact. Major J.B. Heath of the U.S. Army Technical Intelligence Unit recorded in his April 12 report, "Recovered from Farben Building, Mainzer Landstrasse, an extensive correspondence file marked Standard Farben Agreements, 1929-43. Documents detail patent exchanges, joint research on hydrogenation and tetraethyl lead, and ongoing financial settlements through neutral banks up to 1943. These were not rumors or second-hand accounts. They were typed letters on corporate letterhead, bearing signatures of senior executives from both sides. One, dated August 12, 1941, reads simply, 'We confirm ongoing cooperation under Agreement 1938. Communications shall continue via neutral intermediaries. Technical data exchange remains governed by prior arrangement.' The name below the line was Frank A. Howard, Standard Oil of New Jersey. The countersignature was from Hermann Schmitz, chairman of IG Farben. In May 1945, the OSS delivered a comprehensive analysis of the discovery. File E20/IG Farben Standard Relations, classified secret, contained 417 pages of correspondence, accounting records and patent summaries. The conclusion stated, "The pre-war cartel structure between Standard Oil and IG Farben remained operative through 1943, enabling German chemical industries to sustain synthetic fuel output despite Allied blockades. This constitutes economic collaboration through neutral mechanisms rather than direct political conspiracy." After Germany's surrender, those documents became evidence in the Nuremberg industrial trials, specifically the United States of America versus Karl Kroch et al., IG Farben case, NMT Case 6. Held from 1947 to 1948. During those hearings, American prosecutors presented letters showing that IG Farben executives had met with Standard Oil representatives as late as 1941. One cross-examination transcript, dated November 17, 1947, reads, "Prosecutor, did you continue to receive royalties or technical data from American corporations after hostilities began?" Witness, Karl Kroch, "I cannot recall specific payments, but technical cooperation through Switzerland remained possible. Patents were held jointly. Their administration was legal under neutral law." Prosecutor, "Legal but useful to Germany's war effort?" Witness, "Our factories could not have produced aviation fuel without hydrogenation processes derived from those patents." The courtroom record is dry, bureaucratic, but its meaning was unmistakable. The same technology that kept Allied bombers in the air kept German bombers flying as well. Two sides of the same invention. Outside the courtroom, the U.S. Senate began its own investigation. In July 1947, the Senate Subcommittee on War Mobilization opened hearings on cartel practices and national security. Witnesses included government lawyers, economists, and representatives of Standard Oil, DuPont, and General Motors. On August 1, 1947, Assistant Attorney General Wendell Berge testified. The combination of pre-war corporate agreements and wartime neutral trade enabled the enemy to obtain materials essential for war. Our task now is to ensure such economic structures can never again undermine national defense. Standard Oil's legal counsel defended the company's actions, insisting that all cooperation ended before December 1941 and that subsequent trade was outside of our control. Yet internal correspondence obtained by the committee showed that licensing fees between Standard and Farben subsidiaries continued to accrue through neutral banks in Switzerland well into 1943. One document, dated April 14, 1943, from the Swiss Bank Corporation to Standard's Geneva office, confirmed payment of 350,000 Swiss francs, in fulfillment of existing patent obligations, Farben Group. When asked why these payments were not terminated, Standard spokesman replied that contractual commitments under Swiss jurisdiction could not be suspended without violating international law. To the senators, that answer sounded like an excuse written in legal ink. Meanwhile, the CIOS and the newly formed Allied Control Council for Germany were cataloging the full extent of IG Farben's empire: over 2,000 buildings, 500 factories, 100,000 employees, and assets spread across every occupied country. Their report ACC/Econ/42, August 1946, stated, Farben maintained significant pre-war relationships with Standard Oil, New Jersey, General Motors, and other American entities, particularly in synthetic fuel and rubber production. These arrangements contributed to the wartime capacity of the German armed forces. No direct accusation of treason was ever made against the American corporations. The war was over and Cold War politics demanded new alliances. By 1948, as Germany was divided and the Marshall Plan began, those same chemical and oil technologies were being reabsorbed into the new Western economy. But the Senate report, Investigation of Nazi Cartels and American Industry, published in 1948, left one lasting paragraph. Economic cooperation between certain American and German industrial concerns, persisting through neutral channels after the outbreak of war, prolonged the enemy's ability to wage industrial warfare. It demonstrates the need for vigilance where commerce and national security intersect. The document was stamped confidential for decades. It was quietly declassified in 1978. By then, most of the men involved were dead. The factories rebuilt, the names changed, IG Farben became BASF, Bayer, and Hoechst. Standard Oil of New Jersey became Exxon. The paper trail, though, still lay in the archives, silent, unemotional, exact. The bombers that destroyed Luna and Ludwigshafen never knew that the blueprints for those plants had once been drawn in cooperation with an American firm. The pilots flew missions believing they were attacking the enemy's heart. And they were. But in the ruins they left behind, investigators found documents printed on New York paper, typed on American machines, written in a language both sides understood: business. In the final days of the Nuremberg IG Farben trial, the presiding judge, Curtis Sheikh, summarized. The pattern of economic collaboration before and during the war reveals that industrial power transcended borders even as nations went to war. The same system that produced peace also produced conflict. By then the Cold War had begun. The narrative shifted from punishment to reconstruction. American corporations regained their overseas interests. The surviving Farben executives, convicted to relatively short sentences, were released by 1951. Many returned to the boardrooms of the companies that replaced Farben. And the files, the letters between Standard and IG Farben, were stored in the National Archives under the classification E20/Industrial Relations, 1930-45. For 30 years no one looked at them again. It would take post-Vietnam researchers, journalists, and historians to reopen those boxes in the 1970s and realize that, while American bombers destroyed Germany's oil supply from the air, American oil had already reached Germany by sea, through neutral hands, legal contracts, and the machinery of profit that didn't recognize front lines. By 1948 the war was officially over, but the machinery of it, the industrial empires that had armed both sides, was already being reassembled. The world had split into East and West, and in that new order economic power was worth more than guilt. The IG Farben trial at Nuremberg closed on July 30, 1948. Of the 23 defendants, only 13 were convicted. The sentences were light, the longest was 8 years. Most of them served less than half. Karl Kroch, chairman of IG Farben's supervisory board and a key organizer of the synthetic fuel program, was released from prison in 1950. Fritz Termeer, who had directed the construction of the Buna plant at Auschwitz, was released in 1952 and by 1956 sat again on the board of Bayer AG, one of IG Farben's legal successors. The official justification was that West Germany needed experienced industrial managers to rebuild under the Marshall Plan. The United States, now locked in a global confrontation with the Soviet Union, could not afford to dismantle its own network of potential allies. Economic revival was the new battlefield. IG Farben was formally dissolved in 1952, its assets divided into three major corporations, BASF, Bayer, and Hoechst. Each inherited parts of IG's plants, patents, and personnel. At the same time, Standard Oil of New Jersey, restructured after an antitrust ruling, began expanding back into Europe through its new subsidiaries, Esso and later Exxon. Declassified U.S. High Commission documents, HECOG File 260. March 1949, described negotiations between American occupation authorities and former IG Farben executives about the reactivation of the Luna and Ludwigshafen chemical plants. The American side wanted rapid industrial recovery to stabilize Western Germany. The Germans wanted their companies back. They got them. A report dated March 5, 1950 by Colonel William Draper reads, "The German chemical industry remains indispensable to European reconstruction. Despite past associations with Farben, its technical staff must be reintegrated under careful supervision. Priority should be given to companies with pre-war American partnerships." That phrase, pre-war American partnerships, effectively reopened the same industrial channels that had once tied IG Farben to Standard Oil. The new economic order was built on continuity disguised as reform. In 1951, Standard Oil signed a distribution agreement with BASF for chemical catalysts used in refining. Bayer renewed its research cooperation with American pharmaceutical firms. Hoechst entered joint ventures with DuPont for plastics production. None of these arrangements were secret, and all were encouraged by the Marshall Plan administration. In the Congressional Archives in Washington, the Senate Subcommittee on War Mobilization closed its cartel investigations quietly in 1951. Its final memo stated, "No further action required. Economic cooperation with Western Europe is deemed essential to the containment of communism." By the mid-1950s, Europe's industrial base was humming again, rebuilt with American loans, powered by the same oil companies that had supplied it before the war. Refineries in Hamburg, Rotterdam, and Antwerp ran on crude from the Persian Gulf shipped by tankers under the Exxon, Shell, and BP flags. The irony was total. The same transatlantic corporations that had once competed for control of aviation fuel now coordinated under NATO procurement to supply the alliance's new jet forces. In 1957, the newly founded Bundeswehr ordered synthetic fuel additives from BASF, produced under license using patents that originated in the 1930s IG Farben, Standard Oil agreements. The paperwork described them as revised formulations for NATO aviation. During those same years, the Cold War made Western industrial records disappear under new layers of classification. The OSS had become the CIA. Its wartime economic files were boxed and transferred to Langley. The CIOS reports that had documented the Standard Farben connection were absorbed into the Joint Intelligence Objectives Agency, whose primary task was now to recruit German scientists. Between 1950 and 1957, more than 1,600 German engineers and chemists were brought to the United States under Operation Paperclip. Among them were several who had worked for IG Farben's fuel division. Their expertise went into America's jet and missile programs, technology born from the same synthetic fuel research that had fueled the Luftwaffe. By the 1960s, the corporate names had changed, but the structure was the same. Exxon, formerly Standard Oil of New Jersey, had refineries in West Germany. BASF became Europe's largest chemical company. Bayer dominated pharmaceuticals. Hoechst expanded into plastics and dyes. Each of them benefited from American investment and technical exchange programs run under NATO's industrial cooperation agreements. The official record of wartime business ties stayed buried. Only in 1974 did journalists and historians begin to reopen the archives. In New York, researcher Charles Hyam published excerpts from U.S. National Archives files, E20/Industrial Relations 1930-45, that contained correspondence between Standard Oil executives and IG Farben directors. The letters were administrative, dry, full of phrases like royalties, patent pools, technical assistance. But when read alongside bombing reports and casualty lists, they revealed a truth difficult to ignore. The borders of war had never fully reached the borders of commerce. In 1978, the Senate finally declassified its 1948 report investigation of Nazi cartels and American industry. The language was careful, almost sanitized. Economic collaboration through neutral intermediaries provided material benefit to the German war effort. These relationships were commercial in nature rather than ideological. By then, Exxon was the world's largest corporation, BASF and Bayer were major U.S. trading partners, and the Cold War made yesterday's facts inconvenient. Still, some documents remained. In 1981, a German television documentary team gained access to part of the Frankfurt IG Farben archive stored by the Treuhandverwaltung für Chemische Industrie. They filmed rows of boxes labeled Standard Agreements 1934 to 1941. Inside were carbon copies of correspondence already known from U.S. files, letters referencing the ethyl patents, synthetic rubber production, and catalyst formulas. The narrator simply said, "The history of industry is not the history of nations. It is the history of continuity." Continuity was the unspoken legacy. By the 1990s, the world had changed again. The Soviet Union collapsed, globalization replaced ideology. The same companies that had once been part of wartime controversy now sponsored museums and memorials. BASF funded restoration projects at former IG Farben sites. ExxonMobil financed exhibitions on energy history. The archive stayed quiet. In 2003, the U.S. National Archives released the final batch of CIOS and OSS economic intelligence reports. One document, Code E2 2019-45, summarized the entire Standard Farben connection in 5 lines. Pre-war industrial cooperation between Standard Oil, NJ, and IG Farben provided Germany with essential chemical knowledge. Wartime neutral trade maintained limited material exchange until 1943. No evidence of direct military supply. Strategic consequence, significant. That was the official closure, a statement both factual and deliberately narrow. 80 years after the first agreement was signed, the story survives only in footnotes, a caution about how technology, capital, and war intertwine. The files don't speak in moral terms, they just list quantities, signatures, and dates. In those numbers lies the real contradiction. Bombers built from American aluminum and fueled with American gasoline destroyed plants that had used American patents to produce German fuel. No order intended it. No soldier knew it. It was simply the logic of an industrial world where ownership crossed borders faster than armies could march. Today, the former IG Farben building still stands in Frankfurt, now used by Goethe University. Its marble halls are clean, the war scars repaired. A plaque near the entrance mentions that the structure once housed the headquarters of the former IG Farben AG. It does not mention Standard Oil or the agreements or the shared patents. In the archives, the final wartime letter between the two companies remains dated August 12, 1941. No one signed after that. And yet, when Allied bombers hit Luna in 1944, the fuel that burned came from technology born in joint laboratories years before. The paper connection had already done its work. The war ended, the names changed, the flow continued.